Nadia felt the change before it showed itself clearly. Ray's humiliation at the bar hadn't faded into embarrassment the way weak men's pride did. It had hardened into something calculated and dangerous. Men like him never let disrespect go. They studied it, reshaped it, and turned it into retaliation. For 2 days, nothing happened, and that silence made her more uneasy than shouting threats ever could. In combat zones, quiet usually meant someone was moving into position. On the third evening, as she locked the Veterans Center after sunset, she noticed a black pickup parked across the street where no vehicle had been earlier, its windows dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. It wasn't illegal, but it didn't belong, and she memorized the license plate without slowing her movements. When she drove away minutes later, and the truck rolled past her at a crawl, the engine low and steady like a warning. The next night, 2 motorcycles appeared near the corner by the shelter, engines idling while their riders sat motionless, watching the entrance without approaching. 10 minutes later, they disappeared, leaving behind the uncomfortable certainty of being studied. By the end of the week, it became a pattern. Unfamiliar vans lingering, sedans creeping by twice, motorcycles circling after dark like predators testing their prey. They never crossed a line that could bring police attention, but they never stopped being present either. Ray was applying pressure the way criminals always did, through fear that couldn't be traced. Nadia realized then that this was no longer about her alone. They were learning the shelter's routines, counting doors, watching who came and went. One evening, she pretended to water the plants while a biker passed slowly, the iron dog's patch clear on his back as his helmet tilted toward the building. Inside, veterans laughed over card games. Sarah helped newcomers with paperwork. Marcus fixed loose cabinets. And the normal life they were rebuilding stood in sharp contrast to the danger circling outside. Later, as Nadia walked Marcus to his car, 3 motorcycles rolled by at a crawl, one rider giving a mocking salute while another laughed loudly before speeding off. Marcus asked quietly if this was happening because of her, and she told him bullies didn't need reasons beyond losing control. When he wondered if they would really hurt the shelter, she didn't lie, because men like Ray destroyed what they couldn't dominate. That night, Nadia drove slowly through nearby streets, spotting the same motorcycle at different corners, no longer even pretending to hide its presence. At home, she locked every door and stood listening to the quiet, understanding fully now that Ray wasn't seeking revenge alone. He was trying to control her by threatening what she loved. The shelter had become her unit, her responsibility, her mission, and intimidation would not move her. If Ray thought circling in the dark would make her retreat, he had misjudged the woman who had survived battlefields and ambushes far worse than this. He had drawn a line, and Nadia Carter had never stepped back from a fight meant to protect her people. This wasn't the start of her fear. It was the beginning of his mistake. Nadia walked into the sheriff's department the next morning with the steady calm of someone who had faced gunfire and chaos but refused to accept intimidation and silence. Even though every instinct warned her that this town's justice system was already compromised. The building was small and worn, smelling of burnt coffee, dust, and years of ignored complaints, its faded posters about community safety peeling slightly from the walls. A young deputy glanced up with boredom as she explained she needed to report harassment and suspicious activity near the veteran shelter. And after a long wait filled with ticking clocks and muffled laughter from the back office, Sheriff Cal Wilkes finally appeared. His uniform stretched tight over his stomach, and his expression carrying the lazy authority of a man who hadn't been challenged in years. Nadia calmly described the black pickup truck, the circling motorcycles, the repeated presence of unfamiliar vehicles, and how intimidation always started subtle before becoming violent. But Wilkes listened with a smirk that never quite reached his eyes, twirling a pen like the whole thing was an inconvenience rather than a threat. When she mentioned Ray Maddox, the smirk shifted into mild annoyance. The reaction of someone hearing about a friend who caused paperwork rather than a criminal who deserved scrutiny. He leaned back and suggested she was being paranoid, that small towns had curious people, and that maybe bikers passing through weren't plotting anything at all. Nadia kept her tone professional, pointing out timing patterns, repeated surveillance behavior, and escalation psychology, explaining that criminals tested boundaries before attacking. But Wilkes waved it off, saying she'd watched too many crime shows and should relax. When she insisted that the shelter housed vulnerable veterans and that their safety was at risk, his voice cooled, and he asked why she had embarrassed Ray in public instead of minding her business, implying that respect was something she should have shown rather than demanded. He muttered that Ray was rough but not dangerous, that he'd grown up in this town, that everyone knew him, and that stirring trouble only made life harder for everyone involved. As Nadia pushed for an official report, Wilkes finally pulled a form from a drawer with exaggerated slowness, misspelling names, writing vague times, and clearly shaping the narrative to sound like nothing more than a misunderstanding fueled by overreaction. He hinted that some people enjoyed attention, that maybe she had imagined parts of it, and that accusing respected locals could backfire. The undertone of prejudice sharpened his words as though she didn't quite belong here and should be grateful anyone tolerated her presence at all. Nadia felt anger rise but kept it locked behind discipline as he warned her quietly that small towns had long memories and that peace came from knowing when to stay quiet and not push the wrong people. When he slid the form across the desk and said he would look into it, the emptiness of the promise was louder than any refusal. Standing to leave, so Nadia met his eyes and saw not a protector of the law, but a man protecting his own comfort, his connections, and his control. Outside, the sunlight felt harsh after the dim office, and with every step toward her car, the truth settled heavier in her chest. The sheriff wasn't neutral, he wasn't slow, and he wasn't incompetent. He was deliberately shielding Ray and anyone who brought him profit or power. The law in this town had already chosen its side, and it wasn't with the veterans, the vulnerable, or the truth. From this moment forward, there would be no help coming through official channels, no justice delivered politely, no protection unless she created it herself. If Ray's intimidation was going to be stopped, it would not be by badges or paperwork, but by resolve, intelligence, and people willing to stand when the system refused to.